Hey guys, this is Wendy with Wendy's Retired Life, and today I thought I would do an introduction of myself so that you'll know who I am, why I took early retirement, how I could take early retirement, and what I have done the first 2 years of my retirement. So, first, my name is Wendy, and I am currently 61. I retired at 59 on my birthday in 2023. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, right outside of the Raleigh area. And from there, when I got married, I lived for a short time in Virginia, and then we moved back to the coastal area of North Carolina. And that is where I spent the remainder of my life. And it was a good life, and I enjoyed this area. And I'm happy to be back in this area. And now I just want to tell you a few things about what all took place to make me decide to take early retirement. I worked for a hospital in the coastal area of North Carolina, and I had worked for that hospital nearly 15 years. And I enjoyed what I did. I enjoyed my job. I never saw myself leaving the hospital at the age that I did. I thought I would spend my time there until it was time for me to retire. Things happened in the last 3 years that I was at the hospital. And those were the things that were the big determination of me deciding to retire. I'm going to step back just for a minute and tell you that in 2016, January 2016, my husband, we'd been married 28 years, had passed away with colon cancer. And that was a very big adjustment for me. And to put everything in perspective, my son had just finished his first semester at college, and he had just gone back for his second semester. He had only been there maybe 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and his dad and my husband passed away. So that was very stressful for me because I knew I was the only person bringing in income. I could not file for Social Security because he, my son, was out of high school, even though he was still living with me going to college. And there are no benefits for someone who spouses die without having small children in the home. So we went from our expenses being a two income family to a one income family, and all the expenses that were there before he passed. So that was a struggle for me. And I made, after 2 years, I made the decision that it was time for me to sell our home. We had a larger home, and my son had eventually met someone, and I knew the further that relationship went, that meant I was going to be on my own. So it only made sense for me to sell the house. And so that's what I did. So I did have some income from the sale of the house, which allowed me to pay off all the debt that we had. We had also discussed before my husband passed that I would pay off his college education. And so I had life insurance and the money from selling the house. So we I was managing with the debt being lessened. That helped me tremendously. And so I could not work because I still had to pay my rent. I had to pay because at the time that I moved, the only thing that I could find was something to rent. And so I moved into an apartment. There was a whole lot going on with that. And I will talk about the whole breaking down of my home and moving in a later video. But there were reasons why there was nothing on the market at the time that I sold my house. So we went into an apartment, and after a couple years, him and his girlfriend moved into their apartment. I moved into my apartment. And so I was happy being in my apartment. I truly, as much as you can enjoy living by yourself, I really enjoyed living on my own. I had never done this before. I was kind of eased into it because Christopher was splitting his time between his girlfriend and me. So I got used to having those nights where I was totally alone in the house. So that kind of eased me into it. So I didn't have a choice of not working. I had to work. So I knew there was no early retirement for me. So my mindset was I would work till I was 65 or 67 and then retire. And fast forward, the hospital that I worked for was a county owned hospital, meaning the building was owned by the county. And there the hospital that I worked for the actual hospital. I didn't work for the county. I know that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It was a very complicated sale of our hospital. The building we rented from the city for not much. And then the people that worked there ran the hospital, and we worked there. So I really worked for the hospital. I didn't work for the county. And eventually the people that ran the hospital decided that they thought it would be best for the county and best for the hospital and for the people of the city if the hospital was sold into a group that could afford to make the renovations that were going to be required to keep up with modern time. We were landlocked. We were very limited how we could grow. With it being county owned, we couldn't build outside of the county, and that's where our population was growing. So I truly understand the need for our hospital to be sold. So that was bittersweet. And we were sold. And during that time, the money that was made from the sale of the hospital allowed the county to put money into our retirement accounts, because working for not a hospital owned by the county, we could have a pension. And so everybody that worked there were enrolled in a pension plan. You could also have your own 403B, which is very similar to a 401k. I was putting money into a 401k. I moved my husband's 401k into mine. But if you've ever had a spouse or a family member with cancer, you know, the cost of that is expensive. It's not just the medical care. He couldn't work. And so we were already pulling from that. So there wasn't a lot of money left in his 401k. And so what was left, I rolled into my 403b. So I did have money set aside for retirement. And then we were told that we had a few options for our retirement account. We could leave our retirement account where it was, and it would be over, they would oversee that money, but I could not touch that money unless I retired and started taking retirement. Or I could take that money and transfer it to a private financial group, and they could manage it for me. Or you could just retire outright. So we had three options. So you could retire outright and start taking your retirement. And I elected to transfer my money to my own financial group that I wanted to use. And they were managing my money with the takeover of the new management people, the people that owned us. We had a new account, a 401k. I started depositing it into that. My 403b was rolled over into that, and therefore I had money in a 401k. I had money in a retirement account that was supervised by a public financial agency. So I knew I had money that was sitting there that I could access when the time came. And I still was under the mindset that I would continue working until at least 65. The stress that came with a new hospital taking over was tremendous. Our hospital had positions that they did not have. They had positions we didn't have. And so it was the transition into new positions was difficult. And I'm going to use my position as an example. My position fell within 3 different departments of that hospital. For me, it was one position in our hospital. So some of the things that I did was handled in their system as one department. The other portion was handled by a different department. And then the final thing that I did was handled by a different department. So there was not a true position that I could walk into that would be the same position that I already held. And I feel like to be honest, I don't know if we were kept in the dark about our positions by the hospital taking over or by the hospital that was being dissolved. So for me, that was very difficult because I'm the only person taking care of myself. And when this process started, my son still lived with me, basically. And so I was a lot concerned about my position. And I constantly asked, what is going to happen with my position? What is my new position going to be? Am I going to have to take a step backwards? I supervised a group of I think it was 12 or 14 staff members that worked in the women's and children's unit of the hospital, the women's and children's hospital portion. And we did clerical stuff. But again, their positions would have been classified as different things. So I knew the possibility was that I would have to step back. I did not know if that meant a cut in salary. I could have adjusted to that if I needed to. Again, I had money put away that I could take a penalty on. So the stress got real, and I talked to a manager who told me, when I strongly said, I'm really concerned about my position. And I was told I would be worried too. That was her comments to me. That made my anxiety skyrocket. And so I went home, and the next morning I got up, I got ready to go to work, and I was at the point of so much anxiety. I I just cannot even express the amount of anxiety I had just driving to work. Now, nothing had been told to me that I would or wouldn't have my job. I felt like I was going to have a job. I had a really good working relationship with some of the administrators and stuff of our hospital because of the work that I did. So I knew I was on good standing as far as the hospital was concerned. That wasn't my anxiety. My anxiety was the unknown, the anxiety of having a manager not even have the decency to tell me what she knew, what she didn't know as far as my position, um, who didn't even know what my position was. I pretty much I answered to her, but the person that knew what my position was an administrator, really, of the hospital, for the women's and children's. And so it was a very difficult thing for me. But as I was going to work, I thought, Wendy, when you go to work and you get your paycheck, how much money is being deposited into your account that pays your bills? And I thought about it, and I was like, well, I wonder if I can just get that much money out of my retirement each month. I don't know where that thought process came from because I had not thought about it. It wasn't on my radar. It was not anything that I had thought about. So I get to the hospital, I go in, I put my stuff down, and I worked 8 to 5:30. Yes, 9-hour days, 4 9-hour days. I was like, that doesn't sound right. So I worked 8 to 5:30. And so I knew the financial company that my money was in didn't open until 9. So I put my stuff down. I got my staff going. I did all my normal stuff. And at 9 o'clock, I shut my office door and I called them. And I said, is this doable? And she said, yes. How long does it need to be doable? And I told her. And she said, yes, it's doable. I said, so if I go and give my notice right now, I'm going to be okay. And she said, yeah, you will be. Guys, this was in the end of May, first part of June. So I wrote up my resignation letter and I gave it to my manager. And I gave them a month because I knew somebody was going to have to train with me to understand everything that I did and what I did, because some of the things that I did was reports that went up to the CEO and the CFO. And so I knew somebody was going to have to train with me. They were going to have to get on the hiring process, and they would have to get somebody sitting with me for a bit to take over my position. And my manager finally came and she said, let's talk. We don't want you to leave. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to get the clarification that I need. I don't know that she could have talked me out of leaving. I'm going to be honest. I think my mind was made up and I was going to leave. I don't think she could have promised me anything to keep me there. I truly don't think so. But I listened. And advice from one of the nurses that I work closely with. I was not clinical, but I worked close to some of the nurses, and she was a assistant manager, and she said, Wendy, start writing down everything you do. And I said, really? And she was like, yeah. She said, because she even said, I don't believe they know what all you do. I said, okay. So I had done that building up to this. So when she came in to talk to me, I laid the list. It was 2.5 pages. I laid it out and I said, this is what I do. I said, some of it is daily, some of it's weekly, some of it's monthly. I said, some of it's quarterly, some of it is year end. I said, but this is what I do. I said, and this does not even count when I have to go into staffing because we're short staffed and I have to take over the majority of work that person would have done. And she looked at me and said, oh my gosh, you do all this. That was a clear direction to me that I was making the right decision. And she said, what can we do to take some of this off of you? And I said, some of this nobody can take off of me because it is what it is. I have to do it. I said, but there are some things that could come off of me. And she said, how about this? How about if we take the scheduling off of you? I said, okay. I don't have a problem somebody taking the scheduling off of me. Can they take other stuff off of me? Well, let's see how it goes with the staffing and the schedule. Okay. So that told me then and there that it wasn't going to be an option. And so I said, okay. And I said, well, everything else that I do can be done remotely. I said, can I work remote? And she's like, well, let me check. I said, well, I know it was an option for me back in 2020 when everything was going on. And I said, but it was not offered to me, which I later found out that was due to that particular manager. And I said, so if it is an option, I said, that would help. I said, that would alleviate some of the stress. Because then I wouldn't be being interrupted during the day and I could focus on the work that I needed to get done. And she's like, well, let me check. So she came back and she said, how about this? I work 4 days a week. How about you work 1 day at home, 3 days here? And I said, no. I said, because in 2020, the option would have been for me to work all 4 of my days at home. And I said, it's not that I necessarily want to be at home where I'm not supervised. I said, I'm not supervised here. I said, but if I'm working at home, I'm not going to have the interruptions that I have here during the day. And she was like, well, what interruptions do you have? I said, I have doctors that come in thinking that I'm clinical. They interrupt me. Nurses that are transporting patients back and forth, they come in, they interrupt me. I said, anything because of where my office was, it was one of the first offices that you came to. I said, everybody that comes up on this floor, they come to my office and I'm interrupted. I said, it's a constant. And I said, if I did not have all of that, or if my office was moved to a different location, that would have worked. No, couldn't do that. So I told her no. I'm going to go ahead and continue and I will retire. So at this point, I told her my retirement date will be July 26th, which was my birthday. And I said, I just want to let you know. Now, this was within just 2 weeks of my retirement, and they had not even placed an ad. They had not even started looking for somebody to take my place. A week before I'm retiring, I said to her, "You do realize my last day is the 26th." And she said, "Oh, I thought we had decided that you were going to work here 2 days or one day and work there 3 days, be at home one day." I said, "No." She said, "Well, how about you work 2 days and 2 days?" I said, "No, no." And she said, "Okay, let me talk to HR and we'll see about what we can do." I said, "Okay." 2 days before I'm leaving, they have promoted one of the people that worked for me in who I think would do an awesome job into my position. And I was asked to train that person. And I said, "Okay, I can come back PRN for a few days and I can train." I said, "But you need to understand I have a trip planned with my friend, and we're going to meet there. She's coming from Canada. I was coming from North Carolina." I said, "So at that point, I'm not going to be working here anymore." So I went back a couple of days and I'm trying to train my replacement, but yet they're the same interruptions. And I looked at her and I said, "No offense, but I can't do this. I cannot train you like this." She said, "No." She said, "The minute we start, you have to stop and answer a question." I said, "Yes." And I said, "I can't train somebody like this." So I went in and said, "This is not going to work." She does know a lot of the stuff. The other stuff, she can figure it out, to be honest. I said, "She knows enough about the system. She can figure this out. And there's people to help her with the reports." And I said, "She knows those people. I've given her those names." And so I said, "Please don't forget to put in for my payout of my PDO." So the next week, I didn't receive my payout. So 2 weeks later, I didn't receive my payout. So I called HR. It had never been requested. And at that point, they were telling me it's 30 days after your retirement. So we're not required to pay you out because you didn't request it. We're talking thousands of dollars, guys. So I had some difficult words with them. And next week, I got my retirement money or my PDO money. All this is to tell you where the money came from for my retirement. So from that moment forward, I was figuring out what I was going to do, how I was going to do it, all of that. So to be honest, the reason I retired at 59 was because I did not feel that the company I was now working for had any value in what I did. They didn't see the value of me. They did not see the value of my position. So I left on my terms and I didn't want to be told I had to retire. I felt for me mentally, it was better for me to retire on my own. So that's what I did. The first year, so from August to the end of January, I focused in on how I was going to travel. And so I knew at that point I wanted to travel. I did not want to be stationary. I wanted to travel. So I started looking at everything in my home and trying to decide, what do I want to take with me? What do I need to get rid of? And what do I want to keep? I knew I didn't want to put stuff in storage. So I knew basically all my furniture was gone. So I called my son and his girlfriend and said, "If there's anything you want, come and get it." And they did take some of it. They took my office desk and most of the stuff from my office. They took my living room couch. They didn't have room for the chairs. They took a lot of my kitchen stuff. They took a lot. And then one day as I was leaving, I saw my friends that live underneath me in my apartment. And I said, hey, do you know anybody that could use stuff? I said, I'm getting rid of everything. And she said, I'll get back with you. And I didn't hear anything. And I thought, something's off, because we talk all the time. And so I went back and I said, hey. And she's like, well, this is the deal, Wendy. I said, okay. And she said her partner, her wife, had a family home that she had inherited when her mother passed recent. It had been within the year or so. And she said she does not want to ask for it. She feels like there's other need that need it more. And I said, no. I said, tell her I need to talk to her. So that night they came up and we sat down and I was like, you are redoing your family home and you need this furniture for your family home. And I said, I would feel comfortable giving it to you because I know you are going to use it. You're not going to turn around and resell it. You're not going to be trying to make money off the stuff that I'm giving you. And I said, and you need it. I said, so I want you to have it. So she agreed and she took everything. The only thing she did not take was I had two desks. I had a big desk system and one that I used for just journaling when I wanted to sit down and journal. That was separate from my Wendy's Plans, which is my first channel. This is my second one. And she was like, we really don't need a desk. I said, that's okay. I can get rid of a desk and a desk chair. That's not an issue. And so she came in, I packed up everything, had it ready for her and her daughter to come and move. They took everything. So for about a week and a half, I split my time between my neighbor's apartment and a blow-up mattress. So my best friend, Renee, who, she's 10 years older than me, and she lived downstairs. And her husband had passed while I was living in the apartments. And she was like, Wendy, I'm not at home. She had met someone that is now her husband. And she's like, I'm hardly ever here. She's like, you've got a key to my apartment, which I did. I had a key that I would go take care of her cat when she was gone. And she's like, you've got a key to my apartment. Go down there and stay there. Don't sleep on a blow-up mattress. So I kind of split my time. And then the nights that she was there, sometimes I stayed downstairs and sometimes I stayed upstairs. But I did that for about 2 weeks. And then my first trip, I loaded up my car and I didn't go far. I went about an hour and 10-15 minutes away into South Carolina to Myrtle Beach. Now, why did I stay so close? I had a mom who was in a facility. She had Alzheimer's, and I knew I needed to get her from the facility where she was currently staying because her money was running out. So at that point, she was self-pay, and I knew I had to get her on some kind of government program, which for North Carolina is Medicaid. That is the only payer source that would pay for her to be in a skilled nursing facility with Alzheimer's. So I knew I had to be close enough that I could get her moved to a facility that would accept it, and two, to get her settled in, to get her taxes done, my taxes done, to get her applications done, get all of that stuff taken care of. And I knew it wasn't going to be a fast turnaround. So I moved in to Myrtle Beach where I'd be close enough to go back and forth into North Carolina and handle that stuff. And it was a really good way for me to get my toes in the water of traveling. So I know you're going to ask, what did you do for living arrangements when you were traveling? I would book an Airbnb for 30, 28, anywhere from 28 to 30 nights. So I found out that a lot of the Airbnbs would substantially lower their rates if you booked it for a month. And the cutoff was 28 nights. So if you stayed 28 nights, they would reduce the amount of what you paid. And the amount of that was equal to or less than what I was paying for rent. But the difference is I'm not paying utilities. I'm not paying the internet, the water, the electricity, condo fees. I'm not paying any of those fees. I'm just moving in for 30 days, living, paying that amount, and the rest of the money that I have is paying my bills. And at this point, I didn't have any bills other than, well, let me take that back. I did buy a new car because I knew traveling, I did not want to take my car that had 100,000 miles and was 7 years old out on the road and to be putting as many miles on it as I was. So I did buy a car before I started traveling, an SUV. That was, and the insurance was really my only bill, and my health insurance. That was really it. So I knew I could maintain. So I'm still at this point receiving a payout from my financial company. It's just a monthly payout. And I also knew that from the time I retired until the end of January, I was going to be paying penalties on that withdrawal because I was not 59 and a half. But I also knew at 60, I could apply for widow's benefits through Social Security. And so I knew that once that kicked in, I could back off the money that I was taking out of my retirement account that was being managed by a company. And so I was in Myrtle Beach for 2 months, so all of February and March. In April, I booked an Airbnb in Kansas City. I really was not expecting to have the feelings that I had, to have some of the anxiety, I think is what I need to say. So, number one, I had solo traveled a little bit. I was not, so I knew what to expect with solo traveling. I didn't expect to get to a location and just be, I don't know if it was depression. I don't know if it was loneliness. I don't know what it was, but I felt like I am so far away from everybody I know, and I'm here by myself. What happens if something happens to me? And I did have places, emergency things in place, so that if anything happened to me, that they would contact my son. So that first month, I struggled. Hands down, I really struggled. And I think a lot of it was just getting my feet firmly planted into, this is what I want to do, and this is what it's going to take to do it. And I will say by the end of that month, I was feeling so much better. And so my second month was in Laurel, Mississippi. I think that helped me more than anything else. It's a very friendly city. It was a city where I could go and I felt comfortable. I felt, it was a small town. I mean, it's just like, name of the show, small town. It really truly is a small town. It's a bigger town with a small town feeling, is what I should say. and it felt like where I grew up. It really truly made me feel comfortable, and I think that is what allowed me to continue to travel, to be honest. When I left there, I went to Macon, Georgia. Again, it's a bigger city, but it made me feel like it was still a small town. And that's when I realized I needed to stay away from these big cities like Kansas City. And when I went to Ohio, Columbus, and Cincinnati, they were just way too big for me. Um, so when I got to Macon, the kids wanted, I call them my kids, it's my son and his girlfriend. The kids were, I said, I'm going to be in Georgia. Do y'all want to meet up somewhere and spend a weekend or something together? And they were like, sure. We really want to meet in Atlanta. So they came from North Carolina. I drove up from Macon, and we spent 2 nights, I think 3 nights, I don't know. We were there for a long weekend. And we went and did all the things in Atlanta. We went to the zoo, we went to the aquarium. They did World of Coca-Cola and something else, I don't remember. And I wanted to go to the botanical garden, so I did that. They did the other two. And then we did, guys, we just did so much, and we had such a good time, and it just made me feel like, Wendy, you can continue to do this. So then I drove back and I spent the rest of my time in Macon. After Macon, I knew I needed to go home. I needed to check on my mom. So I went home for, I think it was like 2 weeks. And I visited with my mom. I checked on everything for her. I got to spend quality time with her. I went I went multiple times to visit her. And then it was time, I saw other family too, guys. And then it was time for me to go to my next location. So I went up, spent the night with my husband's brother and his wife, so my brother and sister-in-law. And I spent a couple of nights with them, and then I drove to Ohio. I don't remember the name of the city. Have no idea. But it was right on the Ohio River. I even took one day the ferry over to a city in Kentucky for my birthday. And I just did so much in Ohio. I went from one end of the state to the other, guys. I did a lot. Then I went on up to Michigan and spent 3 weeks with my sister and my niece. I did see my nephew while I was there too. And me, my niece, and my sister went on up to the northern part of Virginia. She was in the southern part. We went up to the northern part, and we even crossed over into Mackinac Island. It was such a great 3 weeks because I got to see a lot of Michigan that I had never ever seen. From Michigan, I went down to Dothan, Alabama, and a hurricane came in while I was there, so it cut my time short at that location. I actually left about 3 or 4 days early because I did not want to be in the path of that hurricane. I got my car packed, I left, and it followed me all the way back, almost all the way back to North Carolina. It veered off from the coast and went into Asheville, into the mountains of North Carolina. Um, so I was there for a couple of weeks, and then I went to Italy, and oh, that was just a lovely trip. I enjoyed it so much, and I met my friends Daphne and Jan, who are sisters. Getting off track here. Jan and Daphne went to Ireland on a tour, and I was on the same tour back in 2018. And we just hit it off. And me and Jan were like, we say it even now that we were living parallel lives, her in Canada and me here. Everything in our life happened very similar. Like our husbands died the same year, mine in January, hers in June. she had a grandchild that was born on my husband's birthday. Her husband's birthday was mine and my husband's anniversary. Our sons were about the same age. I mean, everything was just, it was just crazy. But we hit it off and we continued to travel. We communicate by email, we set up trips, we meet each other there, and we have somebody that's there with us so that we're not on our own. Now, stepping back to when I first started traveling, Jan came down from Canada and stayed with me for a week in, it wasn't quite a week, it was about 4 or 5 days in Myrtle Beach. And that was wonderful because we could talk about what we were going to do next. So we met up in Italy in the end of October, 1st of November. And we did that trip. We had a blast. That was like I think it was 9 days. And we just had so much fun. And it was nice that Daphne came with us. She does not always go with us on our trips, but it was so nice that she did this one. So then I came back and I went back to the same condo I had in Myrtle Beach. And my plan was for the winter months to be there because I wanted to be at home with my child for Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. So I booked a Airbnb there, and that's when I made the decision that multiple reasons why I needed to stay in the States and in North Carolina for 2025. The biggest reason was, well, it wasn't the biggest, it was one of the biggest reasons was my mom. She was in stage Alzheimer's. She wasn't eating, she was losing weight, she was not doing good. And I was really concerned. And so I made the decision in January to go ahead and sign a lease on an apartment here. And then I was moving in February 20th. And my mom passed February 16th. So looking at it in that perspective, yes, it was the thing to do. I needed to be here with my mom. But I was also, this is going to be controversial, and I don't mean it controversial, but I knew with everything going on right now, I knew I did not want to be on the road and get mixed in with the ICE raids and all this stuff that is going on right now. I knew I did not want that. And so for me, I made the decision for mostly those reasons that I would move into an apartment for a year. Now, fast forward, I've renewed my lease for another year, and I'm not sure that for me, I will ever go back out and travel full time. I would love to, but I don't think at this point that I will. I I have enjoyed being put now with my son. I did a lot in a year. I saw a lot of states. I saw a lot of things in a lot of different states. And I enjoyed myself and I met people, and it was just a wonderful year of my life. And I will always have those memories. So moving forward, I think what I will do is plan vacations in advance, and that's the way I'm going to travel. So what happened when I moved into my apartment? Guys, I had nothing. I literally had 5 boxes in my sister and brother-in-law's closet that they actually brought them to me. They brought, at my mom's funeral, they brought as much as they could, which was 3 or 4 of the boxes of stuff. So they brought me that, and then I went up a couple weeks later and spent the long weekend with them, and I got the rest of my stuff. We also went thrift shopping and resale stores, and I picked up a couple of things, and I came back with a car loaded down. But I went around in Wilmington area and I did some thrift shopping and resale shopping. But then I had to just order stuff, furniture, and to have it built for me to build it. And so I am very minimalist now, not by choice, but well, I guess it is by choice because I felt like I don't want to purchase a lot of stuff if I decide that I want to go back out on the road. And this is my thought process. Don't judge. I made the comment one day to my son. I said, I really want to make some lemonade. And he's like, well, do it. And I picked up the lemons and I said, no, I can't make lemonade. And he was like, why? And I said, because I would have to buy a pitcher for the lemonade. I'd have to buy sugar, which I haven't bought. And then I'd have to have a container for the sugar. And then I just kept like naming off all the stuff. And he was like, Mama, are you all right? I said, yes, but this is the thing. I didn't even have anything to juice the lemon with. And I said, I don't want all that stuff that I got rid of. I don't want it back. I ended up buying a pitcher because I wanted to make tea. But that was where my mindset was. I didn't want to have so much stuff in my apartment. And because you can imagine 30 years of being married and all the stuff that I had to get rid of. Anyway, that's where we are. I am happy in my apartment. I re-signed the lease. And this time I went ahead and signed up for 15 months. So right now I have 17 months that I can be in this apartment, and I am so happy, and I'm doing what I want, and I'm still doing the traveling that I want. But what really allowed me to do this was being able to withdraw money from my account, retirement account, to live on for a year. And yes, it depleted the amount that was in there significantly, but I still have money, a substantial amount in there, and I'm just being frugal. I pull out from there when I'm traveling. I still get a stipend from there every month. I cut it in half of what I was getting out originally, maybe a little bit less than half. So that helped tremendously. But that's how I was able to retire at 59. Is it the best solution? No. But everybody has a breaking point, and you know when you need to retire. And that was my breaking point, and that's how it happened, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and the next video, I'm not sure yet what I want to talk to you guys about. I really think I want to talk to you about aging parents when you're retiring, and most specifically aging parents with Alzheimer's. I think that is the video I want to talk to you about next, because it was a lot. It was a lot, and I went on the alzheimers.org and learned a lot, but you really can't know until you've done the things that I had to do. So that's probably going to be the next video. So I hope you enjoyed this video or got something out of this video. And I hope you will subscribe, hit that button for notifications. And until next time, guys, bye-bye.